Happy 2025 to all you denizens of podcast land out there. It is time for another spectacular episode of the Fortress of Rock with me, your humble and gracious host, the Ayatollah of Rock and Rolla, the Maestro, Kevin Crane. This is episode 177 of The Fortress, Friday night, January the 3rd, 2025. Time flies. Enjoy every moment. Make the most of every day you have. And of course, that should include a healthy dose of rock and roll, which is what we're here for. This is your weekly check-in, your weekly appointment. Get your fix, your dose, your prescription. A lot of medical analogies, right? This is where you need to be to find out about what's going on in rock and roll, the past, the present, and the future. And of course, we always start off with our tribute to the late, great Freddie Mercury and Queen. It is time for segment 1, News of the World. Let's start off with, yes, believe it or not, a little bit of new music news. It's still kind of that downtime. Once we hit Thanksgiving, roll all the way through, basically, if you want to say Martin Luther King Day, mid-January, that holiday season, not a lot going on when it comes to new music. But we've got some things to look forward to. Word has come down from the Doobie Brothers that they will be putting out a new album in 2025 called Walk This Road. Now, they don't have a specific release date yet, but we're looking at probably mid-2025, late spring or summer. And of course, the big news here is that Michael McDonald is officially back in the fold, not only on tour, but now in the studio. So this will be the first time, I do believe, that we have got a brand new studio album from the Doobie Brothers featuring Michael McDonald. I think you have to go all the way back to 1980, and Minute by Minute, if I'm not mistaken. And then you would have to go back, I believe, even further to find a Doobie Brothers album that featured Tom Johnston and Michael McDonald and Patrick Simmons. So at least we've got more new music on the horizon. Now, I did not really like the Doobie Brothers' last effort, but with Michael McDonald now involved, maybe things will be a little bit better. We'll get a little bit more of that latter era classic Doobie Brothers sound. We shall see. Of course, we will review Walk This Road within a couple weeks after it comes out, sometime in 2025. Now, you guys know there are certain classic rock acts that I am not a big fan of. I can't love everybody. You can't love everybody. It's all personal preferences and personal taste. One of the people that I do not like is Neil Young. However, I feel duty-bound to let you Neil Young fans out there know that he is getting ready to release a previously unissued 1977 album called Oceanside Countryside. That will be coming out on February the 14th. Now, the story I read basically says this album, even though it was scrapped, led to his classic 1978 album, Comes a Time. And there are 3 songs from Oceanside Countryside that also appeared on Comes a Time. And I guess a lot of these songs have appeared in archival releases and various other albums. Little, you know, a song here, a song there. So I don't know how much of this material is actually new. But this is the first time that the album will be released in the sequence it was meant to be released in the sequence and the songs. And this is, again, coming from a guy who does not like Neil Young, I applaud this. Give us the archival material. Give us the unreleased material and let us be the judge. Even if a lot of these songs have leaked out on other albums or in box sets, let's hear it how it was supposed to be originally released. Let the artist, let the performer put it together the way he or she or they wanted to. So I'm very excited for you Neil Young fans out there. This is another example of an artist who gets it, who gives us the unreleased material that we crave. Now, Neil Young is very prolific. He's still creating anyway. Now, again, I'm doing this all for you Neil Young fans out there, not me. But I applaud him for this. I applaud him for continuously being a creative force and not slowing down and not quitting. Like a lot of other artists have. Artists and bands that I love a lot more than Neil Young, who have let me down in their apathy towards new music, or even their apathy towards releasing vault material. So once again, Oceanside Countryside will be released on February the 14th. Now, we don't have a lot of tour news, but we do have one little bit of information to pass along. Santana, as with many other bands out there, Santana had a Las Vegas residency planned in 2025. Part of it was running January and February of 2025. That has now been postponed. We don't have new dates yet. But he was originally going to run this residency at the House of Blues, which is at Mandalay Bay in Vegas. And Carlos Santana has had nothing but bad luck with his health over the past few years. If you remember, he had an issue back in, I believe, in 2022 with heat exhaustion, where he had to postpone a lot of shows. Now he has a significant fall at his vacation home in Hawaii, where he breaks a finger. Of course, guitar player, kind of important to have all your fingers working. So, he will recover, he'll be fine, just needs some time to heal up. So this late January into early February residency, again, this was at the House of Blues at Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas, has been postponed. We do have one moment of silence to pass along. Of course, the 70s were a bizarre time. A lot of different music, a lot of different genres, and it was glorious and it was wonderful. Except for maybe the early 70s with the hippy-dippy stuff. But one of those bands that maybe you liked, I mean, they were before even my time. But looking back, you listen to old music. Again, it was an odd, wild, weird, wacky time. It was the Osmond Brothers. Of course, the Osmond Brothers, one bad apple And of course, Donnie and Marie went off on their own. Yeah, Marie, trust me, Marie isn't a brother. Who knows? That woman still looks ungodly good to this day. With a little help from, I believe, the plastic surgeons, but I digress. But the Osmond brothers were, for a time, very popular. And unfortunately, Wayne Osmond passed away here within the past week. So we send our thoughts and prayers out to all the Osmonds, all their fans. I'm not trying to rip on the Osmonds, believe me. As you guys know, I love almost every type of music out there, despite the accusations that I am a music snob, because I do not like rap and I do not like hip hop. So my daughter says that makes me a music snob. I don't think so. I think it means I just have good taste. And we move on. And we move on to an issue that I always get fired up about. And you guys know this if you've listened to the podcast over the past 3 years plus that we've been on. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And the guy who's currently in charge of it is John Sykes. Now, we got rid of Jan Wenner, right? So, I will say, thank God for that. Jan Wenner was a nasty piece of work. He held grudges, he held vendettas, he did some really questionable things in his life. You guys also know he's connected to Rolling Stone, and I think Rolling Stone isn't even worth being put in the same sentence as a roll of toilet paper. It's a rag. It's not worth the paper it's printed on. John Sykes maybe has kind of made things better. The vendetta immediately goes away from Jan Wenner that he had against Mick Jones and Foreigner. Foreigner immediately, the next year, gets in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Good thing. Great thing. And of course, we'll have the next class of nominees coming up here, I believe, in the next month or so. Looking at Styx, I am very, very curious to see if Styx will make it this year. Because I think Sykes somewhere, somehow, does believe that some of these older legacy acts need to get in. Do I believe him 100%? No. That's where we're going to discuss some comments he made in a recent interview. Now, there's been a big debate here recently, let's say over the last decade, about whether or not the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame should change its name and just call it the Music Hall of Fame because of all the people they're letting in from other genres who are not rock and roll. Not rock and roll. And this is number one point in this interview where John Sykes and I agree to disagree. But the difference is I approach things like a mature adult who doesn't talk down to people. John Sykes is his direct quote in this interview, in this article, when he was asked about changing the name of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And then he says, of course, we're not doing that. But he says, quote, some people don't understand the meaning of rock and roll. How dare you? How dare you talk down to all of us like that? I'll go toe-to-toe with you any day of the week, dude. Any day of the week when it comes to my passion, my knowledge of rock and roll. And I know there are hundreds and thousands of you out there who would line up right behind me to take this guy on too, because you know more about the music than he does. You have the passion. You love classic rock. You know what rock and roll is. I know what rock and roll is. I wonder if John Sykes really knows what rock and roll is. Infuriating quote. Once again, some people don't understand the meaning of rock and roll. Ugh. Oh boy. Nothing I hate more than pretentious, arrogant people. Speaking of which, the other part of this interview, this article, that really got me mad, that really fired me up, was the fact that Sykes talks about an interaction he had with Jay-Z. I believe it was a few years ago. Now, of course, Jay-Z's got his own problems in his personal life, which I'm sorry, should come into play here. It tells you what kind of person Jay-Z really is. But Jay-Z, here's another quote for you. And I know Gene Simmons has said part of this, at least the first part of this as well. But Jay-Z, talking to John Sykes, and again the naming of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame came up, and Jay-Z said, quote, "Rock is dead." That, of course, is the part that Gene Simmons keeps saying as well. Rock is dead. It should be called the Hip Hop Hall of Fame. Unquote. Here's an idea. Why don't you build a Hip Hop Hall of Fame? Put in whoever you want, Jay-Z. You can be in charge of it. You got more money than God. Build it wherever you want. Put in whoever you want. But don't you dare. Number one, keep rock and roll. Keep it out of your mouth. Keep it out your mouth. All right? And don't act like you can take over the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. That's insidious, despicable talk. If you want to set up a Hip Hop Hall of Fame, do it. But don't act like we're just going to take over the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Like some kind of military incursion. I'm telling you, it might be a better situation with the Rock Hall of Fame than it was. But with quotes like this, interactions and discussions going on behind the scenes like this, I'm still very troubled and very worried. And then finally, here in News of the World, this is going to be our segue. This is going to take us into our, let's say, all Van Halen talk for the next half an hour. Our final little note, tidbit, story here in News of the World involves Sammy Hagar. And Sammy Hagar, he works so well, it seems like, with all these people in the music business. He does all these collaborations. He was at the latest Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony. He seems like he is such a great guy, and I'm telling you, he's not. He's not. And there is too much evidence to prove me right. And by the way, I apologize. Still fighting off some kind of winter ick. So if I have to break for a few seconds and take a drink, I do apologize. And I do also want to apologize for the fact that even though it's been quite a while since we switched over to our new recording platform, it's still not where I want it to be. So there might be some gaps you hear here in the middle of the podcast episode. Stick with it. There might be a few extra seconds of silence in certain places. And trust me, unfortunately, it's just better to leave them in to try to slice and dice them out. So look at the total runtime. Realize that if there's a gap of silence for 4 or 5 seconds, the show is not over. Okay, just giving you fair warning. Again, Van Halen reference. So back to Sammy Hagar. You can tell I have a love-hate relationship with Sammy Hagar. I do love the guy. I admire his passion. I admire his business acumen. But he is a sleazy backstabber. Latest example, he can't stop talking about Van Halen. Even though he's been on his own, and he's been a solo act now for well over a decade, on top of all the solo work he did before that, he just can't let Van Halen go. Now, last year when he did the Best of All Worlds tour, and he had me convinced he was trying to keep the Van Halen music alive. He and Michael Anthony were trying to keep the Van Halen legacy alive, since nobody could get together and do a proper tribute concert or tribute tour after Eddie Van Halen passed. I was all fine with it. I'm good with it. Now I'm beginning to wonder. Because now we're going to get another Best of All Worlds tour. And we documented the mysterious situation involving Jason Bonham. I mean, not mysterious, but seemed very harsh and cruel for Sammy Hagar to ditch Jason Bonham. Now, I'm not talking about at the end of the tour in 2024. He had to find a fill-in for the last few shows. He brought in the great Kenny Aronoff. We get that. But then to unceremoniously dump Jason Bonham and say, okay, we're done with you. We're going to stick with Kenny now going forward. That seemed a little harsh to me. Of course, since Jason Bonham had to go back and tend to his sick mother. This is Sammy Hagar. This is who Sammy Hagar is. This is why Eddie Van Halen, in interviews, said he's a solo artist. He'll always be a solo artist because he's always thinking about himself. Now, I don't know what kind of spell he has cast over Michael Anthony to keep him in his camp and keep him transfixed. Maybe it's money. Maybe it's purely, simply money. Because I know towards the end of his tenure with Van Halen, the Van Halen brothers were not very kind to Michael Anthony when it came to finances and his cut of the Van Halen pie. But now, coming up here in just a few minutes, in segment 2, in Breakdown, I'm going to be reviewing Alex Van Halen's memoir, Brothers. So Sammy Hagar had to put his 2 cents in about Brothers. Now, this is something we've mentioned here in the past. When the book came out, a few months ago that Brothers does not address the Sammy Hagar years in Van Halen. It doesn't address any Van Halen stuff after the breakup of the original lineup in 1985. But Sammy Hagar gets a microphone in front of his face and he can't just leave things alone. Remember, this is the man who said recently he wanted to mend fences and be friends with Alex Van Halen. Now, here's the thing. By all accounts, Alex Van Halen is a very personal, private man. He keeps to himself. He loves his wife Stein. That's obvious from the book. He's got his sons. That's it. He doesn't really let anybody else in, from what I can tell. Sammy Hagar, of course, is the opposite personality. Sammy Hagar is gregarious and he's party hardy, right? Even in his 70s, he's Mr. Party Hardy. So those two types of personalities, there's going to be conflict. Now we'll talk more about Alex Van Halen's side of it here in a minute. But Sammy Hagar says, another quote, this time a one-word quote. Sammy Hagar says in a recent interview that it is, quote, blasphemy, unquote, very strong word, that Alex Van Halen's book Brothers did not mention the Van Hagar years. Listen, I don't know what to tell you, Sammy. This is Alex Van Halen's book. He wrote that's what a memoir is. The people who write the memoirs, whether it's recent ones we've seen from Cher or Al Pacino or whoever, they will include what they want. They will talk about what they want. It's their book. It's their lives they're discussing. And if they don't want to be salacious or they don't want to cover certain parts of their lives, they don't have to. And by the way, if you've ever read Sammy Hagar's memoir, Red, now of course Red, R-E-A-D, the book's name is Red, R-E-D, duh. There's a lot of backstabbing in that book. But for Sammy Hagar to go so far as to say it's blasphemy that Alex Van Halen didn't acknowledge Sammy's time in Van Halen, get over yourself. Get over yourself, Sammy. Really. You're wearing on me. And I am one of the biggest Van Halen fans in the world. And you are wearing on me with this stuff. Move on. Move on. You can't seem to keep a band together outside of Michael Anthony for more than a few years before you move on. Literally, I mean, how many different bands have you had? HSAS and Montrose, Van Halen, the Wabos, the Circle. Now it's the Best of All Worlds band, Chickenfoot. Doesn't seem like you can really make a commitment to a group dynamic because maybe Eddie Van Halen was right. Maybe you're a solo act and you always will be. And that leads us into segment 2 as we continue down the road with Van Halen here. Breakdown. Our tribute to Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. This is where we look at recent music releases, documentaries, and here, books. On occasion, we will get a good rock and roll biography, memoir, and of course, this one you knew I was going to have to discuss. Brothers by Alex Van Halen. It's not an overly long read. It's about 225 pages, give or take. We just talked about the fact it does not address anything beyond the original lineup's breakup in 1985. There's actually very little talk of Eddie's passing. I find this to be a wonderful book because I felt like I was sitting in a room listening to Alex speak from the heart and recount the stories of the early days of Van Halen, his early days with his brother and his parents as immigrants coming into the country. It's not salacious. He's not trying to bring people down or tell these sordid tales of what life was like on the road. There are implications, of course. He mentions alcohol, mentions drugs, mentions the women, but doesn't get into a lot of gory details about it. And for me, I like that. That's refreshing. I'm not a reality TV guy. I don't like too much information. TMI. So this was refreshing to me, especially as a Van Halen fan. This was what I wanted and what I needed. Now I wanted more. I expected more in terms of I expected a larger book. I expected 350, 400 pages at least. But Alex chose to keep it short. And again, stops Brothers when the original band broke up. The original lineup broke up in 85. Or at least David Lee Roth left. Because the other three guys, of course, stayed intact, and then Sammy Hagar came in. But I have read a lot, I have watched a lot, and that will include next week. We'll talk about that in the final segment. I have read a lot, watched a lot in documentaries recently about the early 80s and late 70s Sunset Strip area of Hollywood. The Rainbow and the Whiskey A Go-Go and Gazzarri's. Fascinating history when it comes to the music I love. I loved the detail he gives. I love the detail he gives and the personal anecdotes that he tells. And when he says something that he wants to note as genuinely funny or even self-deprecating, I love he just puts in capital letters, ha, with an exclamation point. Ha! I kind of liked it. Again, it feels like he's sitting there in the room with you, telling you about the early years of VH. Now, when you dive into the details, you read between the lines. There's not a lot about Michael Anthony. Really, there are mentions, obviously. But he doesn't talk a lot about Mikey. Just enough so that we all know Mikey's there. Mikey was part of the band, and Alex, I think, respects Mikey and his contributions. But just as much as this is about the dynamic between the brothers, Alex and Eddie Van Halen, there is something, a connection, a mutual respect a different kind of brotherhood with Alex and David Lee Roth. And this is another reason, I think, why he did not go into the Sammy Hagar years. There are a couple mentions of Sammy Hagar in the book, but it's about times that they bumped into him in the 70s in the music scene as they were touring, doing promo, whatever it might have been. But there is a lot of talk from Alex Van Halen about David Lee Roth and what he meant to the band. Now, he gets a couple shots in on Diamond Dave, no doubt about it. But he also mentions that David Lee Roth was the first person he called after his brother died. And of course, recently, in interviews, discussions about the Best of All Worlds tour that we just talked about a few minutes ago, Alex says, I have no interest in it. I'm paraphrasing. He has no interest in it. That's not the band. That's not the magic. The magic happened in the 70s into the mid 80s. And I find it unbelievably intriguing, this connection that Alex Van Halen had with David Lee Roth, for better or for worse. But man, it sounds like there is some kind of a respect factor there where Alex knows, as great as my brother was and as great as we were together, David Lee Roth was the missing piece. David Lee Roth was the guy that helped bring it all together and helped make the magic. That's got to be the most fascinating part of Brothers. Is that while we've got the story of the true biological brothers, the Van Halens, there's also a brotherhood between Al and Eddie and David Lee Roth, and specifically Alex and Dave. And if you guys read the book, I don't see how you can't pick up on that. Now, the respect he gives to his brother, obviously, you know that's going to be there, and it's going to be peppered throughout the book. And of course, at the end, he takes the last few pages to basically say goodbye to his brother. And it's very sweet and it's very moving. But he doesn't overwhelm you. He doesn't turn this into, some kind of a massive tribute to his brother. He acknowledges his flaws, but doesn't go into detail. Of course, the alcohol abuse. There is a little bit of a discussion about the early years of his courtship and marriage to Valerie Bertinelli. Now, Alex, even though he mentions his wife a few times and his sons, doesn't even go into a ton of detail about his personal life, outside of saying that Stein saved him. Now, Alex says he got sober right around the time that David Lee Roth left Van Halen. Now, unfortunately, Eddie did not, and I give Alex a lot of credit for having the guts to say in this book that Eddie's, I don't want to use the word excuse, but that's what it was. Eddie's excuse that he got tongue cancer from metal guitar picks and holding them in his mouth for all those years. Alex, in no uncertain terms, basically dismisses that and chastises his brother for it. And then the one final part, I don't want to tell you everything that happens in the book because then I would be doing you a disservice. You need to read the book. But the other part of the book that I found fascinating, and we get a lot of detail about it, is the interplay between, of course, you get the stuff about the record business. You get a lot of talk about the music business and negotiating contracts and how you get screwed and what you end up having to pay for. You destroy a hotel room thinking the record label's going to pay for it, and then you get a bill at the end of the tour, and they take it out of your earnings and your record sales and the profits. But the discussions about the two men behind the scenes, who I would say had the most influence on the band once they hit big. Of course, their father had a huge influence on them. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about Ted Templeman and Don Landy, producers, engineers that worked on pretty much every Van Halen album. And their quotes and what they have said in their works and in interviews about the band and the interactions and the things that they saw. Fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. This is a great book. And as I mentioned, it's only 225 pages. It won't take you that long to get through it. There are a few pictures. It's not overwhelming with pictures. There's maybe 10 pages of pictures. It's very well done. Very well done. It's humble. It gets to the point. It'll tug at your heartstrings, but it doesn't go too far. It'll make you fondly remember that era of music. There's some great stories about Ozzy Osbourne in there, as Alex recounts the highlights or the lowlights, depending on how you want to look at it, of their touring Europe with Black Sabbath. Just loved it. I can't recommend this book anymore. I will not say it's the greatest nonfiction book or greatest memoir I've ever read, but for me as a Van Halen fanatic, it did what I expected it to do. All I wanted was more. And I think that's understandable. All I wanted was more. And maybe if Sammy Hagar hadn't opened his yap and let things simmer for a while, who knows? Maybe Alex was going to, down the road, do another book about those years. I doubt it. But read the book and just notice the differences between Alex Van Halen and Sammy Hagar. It's shocking. It's striking how different they are. And the fact that they were cohabitating in a band for as long as they did. And then, of course, it explains why, in the end, David Lee Roth came back. And I've got to believe Alex Van Halen played no small part in that. Of course, Eddie wanted to play with Wolfgang, his son. But they always said about that band, when they got back together and they put together a different kind of truth, and they went on those 3 final tours together. I can't remember if it was Eddie or Alex, but one of the Van Halen brothers said, when asked why you brought David Lee Roth back in, one of them said, because this is what the fans want. This is the Van Halen the fans want. And this book, Brothers, solidifies that viewpoint. So again, check out Brothers by Alex Van Halen. Now, to wrap up our little Van Halen fest here, Synergy, It all comes together. It all works in a cosmic way. We have a new song from David Lee Roth to review. Of course, David Lee Roth has been working a lot lately. Cover songs, reimaginings of old Van Halen songs, and sprinkled in there every couple months, a new song. And the latest we just got dropped on YouTube a few weeks ago is Forgiveness. Now, Forgiveness is a basic blues song. Kind of a sparse arrangement. You've got harmonica, you've got acoustic guitar, you've got tambourine, and you've got Dave singing. And as you can tell by the title, it's basically a plea for forgiveness for all the lies, all the sins, all the terrible things the protagonist has done throughout his life. Is it a thinly veiled plea from David Lee Roth himself for forgiveness? Is he asking Alex Van Halen for forgiveness? I know I'm reading into this. I'm reading into it. But it's a great song. Not a classic. Again, don't take my enthusiasm. When something's an all-time classic, I will point it out. But Forgiveness is a great song. You got to listen to it. I'd say it caught me in the second listen. The second time I listened to it, I understood the vocal hook at the beginning of the chorus. The lyrics hit home for anybody who's ever felt a shred of guilt. This song should resonate with you. And that's pretty much everybody and anybody, I would hope. Otherwise, we got a lot of dark, nasty people among us. But David Lee Roth, what he's been doing the last few years is hit and miss. You know, he'll put out a great cover of Baker Street, along with a good cover of Tommy Two Tone's 8675309. But then he'll do some weird, bizarre dance videos involving old Van Halen. And then, of course, still a few years ago, we were getting some of these songs that he did with John 5, roughly, I think about 15 years ago. And we're still waiting for that album. And John 5, now with Motley Crue, has said it's unbelievable, the material they put together. And we've gotten little chunks and dribs and drabs of it. But it doesn't shock me that we're not getting a new album from David Lee Roth. I think he is too, I don't want to say media savvy, but he does stay current. He does try to stay up with the times. And so he knows now that the thing is, you release the YouTube video or you release a song on Spotify, you don't necessarily have to put out a full album, even though people like me, probably some of you, would love to hear a full album. We will never let go of the album format. But check out Forgiveness by David Lee Roth. As I mentioned, right now, currently, I believe only on YouTube. It is a great blues song. Very, very solid. So, check out Brothers by Alex Van Halen. Check out the song Forgiveness by David Lee Roth. And so that will do it for our little Van Halen chat for this week. Now, of course, we move on to a trip to the past. I am going to wander out to the garage here at the Fortress of Rock. Doc Brown patiently awaiting me Going to have to fight through some snowflakes, some flurries, as we take the rock and roll DeLorean out into the rock and roll time stream and get you ready for I Want to Go Back. Alright, so now I'm buckling myself into the rock and roll DeLorean as Doc Brown fires it up to 1.21 gigawatts, pulling out of the garage here at the Fortress of Rock, getting ourselves in to the rock and roll time stream. But as we do this, you know I've got to, at every point, every episode, at this point, I got to take care of some business. First up, you found us somewhere. Thank you very much. Very appreciative as always. But you have options and you have choices. You can find the Fortress of Rock every Friday night. New episode, and then of course all the old episodes, the archives. Spotify, Pocket Casts, Apple, iHeartRadio, Overcast, Amazon Music, Castbox, Audible, and Good Pods. And then, of course, do not forget our Facebook page. No, we're not on X or Instagram, but we are on Facebook. And we do a couple fun things every weekend on Facebook. First thing we do, drops on Friday night, just like the brand new podcast episode, The Weekend Rock Project. It's out right now. So as you listen to this, jump in, have fun with the Weekend Rock Project. This weekend, we want your best, your favorite rock songs that feature Mr., Mrs., Ms., Madame, one of those titles, one of those formal salutations, one of those in the title of the song. So many out there. This should be an easy weekend for all of you kids. I, of course, started things off with a very obvious pick, Simon and Garfunkel's Mrs. Robinson. I did put one stipulation in, though, for all of you clever cats out there who think you can outwit the Maestro. Do not use the words in any way other than as it's intended, a salutation, a title. For example, Miss, do not start giving me songs like Miss You. All right? That's not how it's supposed to go. It has to be Miss. There are songs I could give you as examples of correct ways to use it, but then I'd be spoiling some of the picks. Miss can only be used referencing a woman or a girl. So check out the Weekend Rock Project. Then on Sunday is the New Music Sunday video. I will post a link to a YouTube video every Sunday. Give you guys some exposure to some new music because we got to keep rock and roll alive. We've got to keep new music going. I will admit, slim pickings out there right now. Very, very slim pickings. So I have no idea here in a couple days what I'm going to put out there for you for your New Music Sunday. But every Sunday afternoon on the Fortress of Rock Facebook page is New Music Sunday. Then also, I like to acknowledge my sources for ideas, the opinions, the rants, the asides, the tangents are mine and mine alone. But some of the news items from segment 1, News of the World, and here, the historical dates, birthdays, anniversaries, notes, some of that stuff comes from one of our sources as well. The three main sources that I use. outside of my voluminous knowledge of rock and roll, ultimateclassicrock.com, thisdayinmusic.com, and the Van Halen News Desk.com. All right, so we're up to speed here. Traveling back through rock and roll history, let's start off with birthdays here on January the 3rd. We're going way, way back already. Usually that's how it works. Birthdays, we tend to go further back, and then we will come back to more recent times with anniversaries. But we're already going way, way back to January the 3rd, 1946, for a pair of birthdays. First up, John Paul Jones, bassist for, of course, the mighty Led Zeppelin. And don't forget them Crooked Vultures. Fantastic, fantastic one-off band featuring him and Dave Grohl. Then also born on this day, in 1946, Robert John, who did have a couple significant hits. The yacht rock classic Sad Eyes, and then I kind of forgot he sang this one. Big hit remake of The Lion Sleeps Tonight. I'm not even going to try to do the high notes. You don't want to hear that, especially with my voice the way it is right now. So John Paul Jones and Robert John, both born on this day in 1946. Born on this day, January the 3rd, 1945. At the very beginning of the podcast this week, I mentioned there are artists, there are bands that I don't really like. And that's okay. You've got some you don't like. You might not like some of the bands that I love, and vice versa. And that's okay. I mentioned Neil Young. And by association, that probably would include Stephen Stills. Stephen Stills, born on this day in 1945, of course, a member of CSN, Crosby, Stills, and Nash, CSNY. Of course, that adds in Mr. Young. Buffalo Springfield, another band that he was in with Neil Young. But I have to somehow, some way, acknowledge Stephen Stills for a great solo song that he put out that I still close out every podcast episode with. Yes, Stephen Stills is responsible for Love the One You're With. Born on this day, January the 3rd, 1943, Van Dyke Parks. Now, Van Dyke Parks, known primarily as a collaborator with the Beach Boys and Brian Wilson. And of course, he had a big hand in their famous Smile sessions. Born on this day, January the 3rd, 1926. You could argue the most famous music producer of all time. I don't know. Hard to argue. Hard to argue. George Martin, born on this day. Of course, most well known for producing virtually all of the Beatles' music. Albums, songs. I think there might be an exception or two in there, but not many. Not many. Most of the Beatles catalog produced by George Martin. Then finally going to take you way, way back. As I said, I'm not a music snob. I'm not. We're going to go all the way back to January the 3rd, 1916. And we're going to acknowledge the Andrews Sisters. Yes, music that your parents, my parents, listened to in their teens and their 20s. One of the Andrews sisters, Maxine Andrews, born on this day, January the 3rd, 1916. So now, turning it all the way around, Doc Brown's getting us from 1916 back into more recent times as we go through anniversaries and classic moments in rock and roll history for January the 3rd. On this day, January the 3rd, 2021, Jerry Marsden passed away. Of course, he is Jerry from Jerry and the Pacemakers. Most notably, classic song, very underrated song, Ferry Crossed the Mersey. On this day, January the 3rd, 2014, Phil Everly passed away. Of course, Phil Everly of the Everly Brothers. On this day, January the 3rd, 1987, Aretha Franklin becomes the first woman to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Deservedly so. On this day, January the 3rd, 1980, Amos Milburn died. Who, you might ask, is Amos Milburn? Amos Milburn, if we didn't have him, we wouldn't have George Thorogood's phenomenal, all-time great drinking song, one bourbon, one scotch, and one beer. That is Amos Milburn's song. And Amos Milburn passed away on this day in 1980. And then finally, to wrap up our anniversaries, couple chart nuggets, chart tidbits for you. On this day, January the 3rd, 1976, the Bay City Rollers had the number one song in the U.S. with Saturday, Night. That's right. Saturday Night by the Bay City Rollers. Your number one U.S. single on this day in 1976. And then, what a great, great song to close out our trip back in time with. One of my all-time favorites. On this day, January the 3rd, 1970, B.J. Thomas, Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head, was the number one single in the United States on this day in 1970. Good stuff, kids. Very, very good stuff. Kudos to Doc Brown for navigating us safely through the rock and roll time stream once again, as he does every Friday night. So that'll take care of segment 3 here on the Fortress of Rock. But we're not done yet. You know this, as Doc Brown pulls the rock and roll DeLorean into the garage here at the Fortress of Rock. Turns off the engine. I climb out. We shut the garage door, pull the drawbridge up over the moat, and I wander back to the studio as we've looked at the past and we've looked at the present Now we look at the future in our fourth and final segment, Wrap It Up. Wrap It Up, of course, our tribute to the fabulous Thunderbirds. Going to look ahead to what we've got in store for you in the coming weeks on the podcast. Now, in terms of songs to review, not a lot. I kind of alluded to this a few minutes ago talking about our New Music Sunday. I don't know where I'm going to go with that, but I might go with this song. The one song that we've got out there to review probably will be next week. Is a new song from the Black Moods, one of those bands that we love here on the Fortress. Smaller band, but a great band nonetheless. The Black Moods have released their cover of Post Malone's Circles. And so that one song we've got sitting out there will probably, like I said, review for you next week here on the Fortress of Rock. Now, looking ahead to the big reviews for the next 3 weeks here on the Fortress. Next week, another documentary. And I've been talking about this for quite a while. Talked about the book when it came out. Now Paramount Plus has a documentary 3-part series covering the birth, the rise and the fall of hair metal from the late 70s all the way through to the early 90s. Nothing but a good time is our featured review next week in Breakdown here on the Fortress of Rock. That is episode 178. That will drop next Friday, January the 10th, 2025. In 2 weeks, I've been waiting months and months for this album. The one new release so far in 2025, Tremonti. The End Will Show Us How. Finally. It will be out next Friday. I will have my review for you in 2 weeks. My full review. We've reviewed 4 songs off it so far. The full album review in 2 weeks. Episode 179. Dropping on January the 17th, 2025. Now in 3 weeks, finally. Now, I just said that about Tremonti, but that's because of anticipation building. We're going to review Tremonti 1 week after it's released. Give me 1 week to dig into it, give you a solid review. Big difference here in 3 weeks. An album that has been out for a while, that I've been kind of trying to fit into the schedule, fit into the agenda. And it just hasn't worked out, but it looks like it finally will in 3 weeks. And I am guaranteeing it. I've been wishy-washy about it over the past few months. I'm guaranteeing it. I finally got a decent price on the CD version. The physical copy. Even though there are issues with it, which I'll discuss in 3 weeks. But the new album from the Smashing Pumpkins, Agori Mori Me. Finally, I will have my review of that for you. Episode 180. Dropping on January the 24th, 2025. So what does that leave us with? Well, I think you know what that leaves us with. It's basically the 1 year anniversary of when we started this. When I decided to take matters into my own hands and say, Billboard's charts suck. They used to be great. They used to be awesome. When I was growing up in the 70s, into the 80s, even into the early 90s. The Casey Kasem's America's Top 40. Now the Billboard charts mean nothing to me. They're a joke. They're an absolute joke. And they do their best to exclude rock and roll. Another reason to hate and despise them. So, you got to fix things. I'm the kind of guy that fixes stuff. Not really. Not really. I can't fix plumbing. I can't fix electric. I can change an air filter in a car. But that's about it. But when it comes to this kind of stuff, I can fix it. So a year ago, we started the Fortress of Rock charts and put them here at the end of every show in the fourth segment. Wrap it up. So in a way, our tribute to the Billboard charts, but not. This is ours. This is what we're listening to, kids. You and me. So our number one album, first chart for 2025, here on January the 3rd, our number one album is the album I just mentioned. As I'm starting to ramp it up, listening to it, getting ready to give you my review in a few weeks, our number one album is Smashing Pumpkins, Agori Mori Me. And again, full review coming in 3 weeks, episode 180. As far as our top songs go, and yes, I cheat, and I usually pick a couple. This week, same as last week. The title track, again, such an unbelievable, phenomenal song. The title track from Mark Tremonti's new album, his band. 7 days from now, it will be out. The title track, The End Will Show Us How. We'll share top honors once again for the second week in a row with the song we just reviewed earlier in the podcast, David Lee Roth's Forgiveness. So to recap, your number one album here on the Fortress of Rock this week is Smashing Pumpkins, Agori Mori Me. Your top songs for the second week in a row, David Lee Roth's Forgiveness and Tremonti's The End Will Show Us How. Now, The End Will Show Us How has been on top for quite a while. Second week in a row, though, sharing the honor with David Lee Roth. And I think I got everything. I think I covered it all, so I think we are done. Here on Friday night, January the 3rd, 2025. And once again, I will beg forgiveness for the fact that my voice still sounds a little bit like Froggy from the Little Rascals at times. And I have to take an extra break or two throughout the podcast, so hopefully it doesn't sound too choppy. But as always, thank you very, very much for putting in the time along with me and discussing the music that we know and love, classic rock and roll. And despite the forces aligned against us, yeah, I'm talking about you, John Sykes. Yeah, I'm talking about you, Jay-Z. We will prevail. Rock soldiers will prevail. I hope wherever you are starting off 2025 healthy and happy. Hopefully you're someplace where the weather is good. I can't say that for the Fortress of Rock. I look outside the window and I see snow. It's supposed to get a lot more here in the next few days. Ugh. But that will not prevent us from being here for you every Friday night for another trip through the world of rock and roll. I am the Maestro Kevin Crane. You are who you are. Even though it's a new year, take care of those around you, your family, your friends. Love the one you're with. There you go, Stephen Stills. Until we meet again in 7 days, peace out.